Hey everyone, it's Septandy, which means we're going to be celebrating all things Tandy and TRS related. So I thought I would bring my only Tandy machine out of storage and do a quick review on it. This particular unit is my Tandy 1000 RLX HD version A. But before we do a full review of this very quirky computer, I thought I'd do a real quick little recap of Tandy and why they're so synonymous with the vintage computer groups, and also kind of talk a little bit about where they came from and what happened to them.
Tandy has a very strange startup. In the early 1900s, it was actually known as Tandy Leather Company, which by that time was making a bunch of leather-based products. In the 1960s, they actually changed their business to electronics when it acquired control of Radio Shack, which by that point was a 40-year-old electronics business with a few stores and a mail order arm. From the 1960s and 1980s, Tandy Radio Shack grew to over 8,000 stores worldwide. In 1977, they became part of what is known as the Trinity by releasing their home computer, which was known as the TRS-80 Model 1. This computer went up against the Apple II and the Commodore PET and was one of the first practical, affordable offerings for a home computer. But today we're going to be talking about the Tandy 1000 line, which is very prolific and actually one of the first IBM PC compatibles to come out of the 80s, beating even Compact to the market for PC compatibility. The Tandy 1000 actually began its life as a clone or a compatible PC to the IBM PC Junior, which was slated to be coming out very soon. The PC Junior was supposed to have been a small home market version of their much larger PC offerings. This was to kind of get a way to get into the home market that IBM wanted to do. The problem was the PC Junior had a lot of proprietary nonsense built into it, including a chiclet-style wireless keyboard, proprietary power and video connectors, which made it incompatible with a lot of hardware. It even made it software compatible. Turns out the PC Junior did not have PC compatibility with games and software from the larger PC offerings. So Tandy quickly dropped the PC Junior compatibility to just PC or DOS compatibility. This meant that the Tandy 1000 was actually marketed quite well as a home computer that was going to be less than $1,000. In fact, most systems, including monitor, actually sold for around $1,200. And since they were some of the first PC clones on the market, they actually had the basic peripherals, including keyboard, mouse, drives, etc., using proprietary ASIC, which is a forerunner of the modern chipset. The original Tandy 1000 came in an IBM PC-like desktop case. Some models actually came in a home computer-style case, much like the Atari or the Commodores of the time. This high level of consolidation integration made them very cost effective to the more larger PC XT class machines that were out on the market, which required multiple add-in cards. A lot of PCs at this time, you needed to have the main motherboard, and then you had to have a card for disk drive, card for video output, card for RAM. The Tandy 1000 was all integrated onto the board. However, the PC Junior did give something to the Tandy 1000 that made it even more popular. Because it copied the PC Junior's graphics capabilities and 3-voice sound, but did it in a much better economical way, most games coming out during the DOS era actually had a Tandy graphics and Tandy sound compatible mode, which was actually nothing more than just a 16-bit color, which the PC Junior wasn't offering. It was offering still EGA and CGA based graphics. The Tandy 1000 was actually sold throughout the years and had several different names, including 1000, EX, HX, SX, TX, RL, SL, and TL in no particular order. Most of these machines are XT class machines which cannot support extended memory despite using common processors at the time that did allow it. My RLX 1000 is actually an oddball in a lot of ways, as it is a XT class machine that does support the 384K of extended memory, and the big brother of this, which is the RSX, is a full AT class machine running a 386 processor and can support up to 9 megabytes of extended memory.
Okay, so let's go over the Tandy 1000 RLX and the many quirks and interesting features with this little machine. One of which is, first off, the size of this machine. Width and lengthwise, it's not too different from most of the desktop computers of the era. But if you just look how tall it is. This thing is very, very small. In fact, let's kind of compare the height to another computer. And we're going to compare it to a computer I've already shown off in another video, which is my IBM PS1. I mean, just look at the height difference in these two machines. And just to make sure it's not a trick of the camera, I mean, look at that. That is a huge height difference in these machines. And this one even has the rubber feet still. This one, I haven't replaced the rubber feet yet. In fact, let's compare this to another computer. One that I haven't shown on the channel yet. And this is a much later computer, which is a Dell Optiplex from 2001, I believe. And even it's considerably taller than the RLX. By a considerable margin. So, its very slim profile design is actually from some of the hardware decisions that Tandy made during its production and development. On the front, you have the standard. Run-of-the-mill power button, the 1.44 megabyte 3.5-inch floppy drive. This is damaged. It's supposed to say 1.44. It looks like it says 1.41. So it's a standard floppy drive. This is a spot for another 3.5-inch floppy drive. So the models that did not come with the hard drive, the RL and I believe the TL, there would have been a second 3.5-inch drive here. That would have been the drive A for inserting your DOS boot disk, and then drive B for your software, your game, your application. But since this thing has an internal hard drive of 20 megabyte, this is just a cover plate that is loose. It's supposed to be that way. On the side, very large vents for a lot of airflow. And that's because this thing is passively cooled. There's no cooling fan in this thing. Because of the way they did the circuitry and the motherboard and a lot of the hardware, this thing's totally silent. In fact, if I was to unplug the hard drive and the floppy drive, you couldn't hear this thing run. It's just that quiet. On the back, we have some oddities. We have the standard power connector, 3-pin, like that most computers use even today. Standard 9-pin serial up here. 2 7-pin joystick ports. Earphone or speaker out, microphone in. Volume control knob. VGA monitor, and it's actually missing 2 pins, which is not too uncommon for a lot of VGA systems at this time. bidirectional parallel port, which is labeled printer, and keyboard and mouse, which appear to be PS2, and technically they are on a physical level, but there's an asterisk there, and I'll get to that later on in the video. And the one expansion slot. And yes, this thing does have an expansion slot in it. So let's get this thing opened up, and we'll continue on with some more oddities that this machine has. Okay, so to take these type of computers apart, there's 2 screws on each side. I've already removed them. And you kind of have to pull out on each side because there's a divot it locks into. 1, 2. And it slides forward. And that's the entire case. So you can see the motherboard is actually pretty small, but we're going to go over some of the component and pieces of this thing. We have the VSLI chipset, or chipset. It's just an early, what we call chipsets now. The 2032 CMOS battery, which is really nice because a lot of these XT machines used NiCad batteries or those barrel batteries that have a tendency to explode and leak. Here's the processor, which, yes, that is the AMD logo. This is an AMD 286 clocked at 10 whole megahertz. Right here is the 4 megabytes of RAM, which is the maximum this board can support. The BIOS chip, the several controller chips, and all the other little components. The floppy drive, which has its little quirk I'll get to in a second. The hard drive, which is a Seagate ST351A/X, and I'll get to the quirk here with that in a second. And this is the riser card that has all the inputs and outputs, the joysticks, the sound, and serial port. And it's on a really, really strange riser style pin. It's just, there's a little PCB with a bunch of traces that go up and down that connect to this slot right here. And that's it. This is actually the A revision. The B revision has a completely different circuit board up here. And right here is the single 8-bit only expansion slot, which is standard ISA, like most XTs at the time. And the piezo, or the cone speaker, for all the sound. So yeah, this thing has so much quirks and interesting things going for it. Trying to avoid a shadow. So yeah, you can see how small the board is, especially compared to the XTs and ATs at the time, which is very strange because given 1990, this was around the time when AT was becoming standardized. And this thing still has enough proprietary nonsense to it that it makes it a bit of a challenge to restore one of these or even use one. And we're going to start with the floppy drive. It's a standard appearing, but there's no power port. None. All the power comes in through the floppy connector here, which is very similar to what Tandy put in their laptop at the time to consolidate and save space. And you can see there's no extra wires. Like, the only wires that come out of the power supply is this little proprietary connector here and the 4-wire for the hard drive, which is not even color coded correctly, if you can look at it. So you have to find a floppy drive if this thing goes out where the pins actually deliver power and ground, which there's a couple forum pages that you can get a circuit board that adapts a standard one, and it kind of reroutes traces so that this does deliver power where it's supposed to. The hard drive is a real oddball here. It is technically an A/X, which means this is a 16-bit AT compatible and a 8-bit XT compatible. Most of the time, the 8-bit hard drives were on hard cards. That would be on these massive, half a foot long cards that had the controller integrated on it with the hard drive, and it would slide and slot into the expansion bus on IBMs and IBM compatibles. But this is just a standalone hard drive, which has a bunch of jumpers that you can set to run in either 8-bit mode or 16-bit mode. But with it being an 8-bit mode, I can't plug this hard drive into any other IDE-based computer to copy or put data to it, because it doesn't know how to respond to it. It doesn't know what to do with it. And I can't set it to 16-bit mode to try and get information off of it, because then it has a possibility of corrupting data, which I do not want to do. Because the hard drive still does work. Tiny bit noisy, but I'll figure something out in the future if it ever goes out. So one of the oddball quirks with this machine here is that Tandy had, early on, their own proprietary video chip that put out what they called Tandy Graphics, or was later called Tandy Graphics. It was a copy of the video chip type that IBM PC Junior was using in the original 1000. But the problem is that by 1990, when this machine, 1991, when this machine was coming out, the problem was that this was a time when a lot of computers were going towards standardization and a lot of integration, which this machine does have a lot of integration to it, but enough of it is still proprietary to where it's almost too quirky to call it a full XT DOS computer, but it's also standardized enough to where you can call it that. So Tandy decided to use a generic run-of-the-mill VGA video chip, which is right here, and it is a NCR 77C20 VGA chip, which has its own dedicated 256K of video memory. So it no longer has to share with the 4 megabyte or 1 megabyte of the computer, which makes this a lot better, and it makes it better in a lot of ways to its predecessors. But this adds an interesting quirk. Most older DOS games from the original Tandy 1000 and up during the DOS era, you could select what video chip you had or what type of computer or video compatibility it had. So you'd start up with, like, are you using EGA, CGA, Hercules, or Tandy, like this one, and it would start the game with the color palette and the color mode that would be most appropriate to it. Later DOS games, some of them anyway, would auto-detect the hardware that you're using, and it would automatically set it to the video mode that you're using. The thing is, this, because of its VGA chip, automatically detects as a PC compatible with VGA output, which means a lot of Tandy specified games will not give the correct color palette, and it will start up in just a generic VGA mode. This kind of broke some compatibility with older DOS games, especially ones that were targeted for the Tandy graphics, which was kind of a sour point with this machine. But because it's VGA driven, it is backwards compatible with Tandy graphics, EGA, CGA, and Hercules. But it also means that it won't display the correct Tandy graphics that a lot of vintage DOS gamers like to see. Which also brings another interesting quirk. And I'm not even going to say feature, I'm just going to say quirk at this point, is the audio chip. It uses the same 3-voice sound chip that Tandy had used in their original 1000, which means on a sound level, this is fully compatible with older DOS games, because it'll auto-detect as the Tandy sound and set it appropriately. The problem is, because of some integration they had to do with this particular unit, the sound chip also controls the input for the joysticks. That's not that big a deal. That, you know, sound blasters do that, and a lot of other, I think the Gravis Ultrasound does that. But where this has some reliability problems is that in older DOS games that use only the analog sound, that only put out beeps and noises and whatever for the PC speaker, it works fine. You're not going to have a single problem. But because the sound chip, especially on the digital to analog converter part of it, or the DAC, controls the input for the joysticks, when it has to play a digital sound through the speaker, it actually doesn't have enough circuitry to do both a joystick input and a sound output. So it will actually shut off the joystick every digital sound that's played. Which means if you're in the middle of playing a game, every digital sound will disable the joystick at that instance. Which is not that big a deal for older DOS games because they don't have that much digital sound. It was all designed for these older sound chips like this, but later games, especially around 1990, 91, etc., a lot of games were using digital sounds and digital samples to add much better sound anyway to games. And it kind of meant that this machine would have a gameplay problem. It wouldn't be that big a problem if you were playing with the keyboard. And I'll get to the keyboard here in a second because there's a lot of weird quirks with that thing too. But it just means that you wouldn't be able to play super high, demanding movement games with a joystick on a game that has a lot of digital audio sounds. There is a way to fix that, and it's with installing a sound card. But here's another interesting quirk with this. Only certain sound cards, because of the way they handle the circuitry to run an 8-bit, which lets it run quiet and on low power, only 25 watts, believe it or not, this is only a 25 watt power supply. They also had to cut the amount of IRQs and DMAs, and some of the IRQs are actually wired a tiny bit differently than most PC compatibles around this time. Not enough to be completely incompatible with certain things, but enough that some sound cards will actually cause hardware problems and software problems if you install them. I checked on a few forum sites, and I believe if I remember correctly, the Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 is the ideal sound card for this because of the way the IRQs are set up. It won't interfere with any pre-existing ones on the board, so you'll be able to just plug in the sound card, set in the drivers, and you'll be able to have the joystick input and the sound output without conflicting with each other on the original board. But it has to be a Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 that's able to run in an 8-bit mode. That's one of the unfortunate hardware requirements. And something I find really kind of interesting is there's a jumper right here. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. Right there. That says video enable or disable. Now, my IBM PS1 has the exact same thing, and what that does is when I install a video card, is that it will actually disable the onboard video and go straight to the expansion video, which is fine because on that machine it's got 512K of video memory built into the board. So if I want to install a 1 megabyte card, I can. The problem is this uses 256 megabytes of video RAM, which for an 8-bit system is a lot. I'd have to get an 8-bit 512K video card, and I honestly don't think it's worth me upgrading the video because with its only 1 megabyte of RAM and its weird audio quirk, I don't think it'd be worth me installing anything. In fact, a lot of people, because of all the stuff this stuff had integrated to it, the only thing people really installed in these things back then was networking cards, which this one does not have, luckily. Or otherwise, I'd have to track down this very odd, proprietary to almost cover, because it's not a standard. It's not a standard cover. It's kind of a different proprietary Tandy one. That's the other annoyance. The only thing that I could put in here is an XT to CF bootable card, which lets me use a CF card as a hard disk should this thing fail. But since it still works, it still boots, and even if it does fail, a really interesting thing about this is it actually has it's DOS 3.0 and I believe DeskMate version 2 pre-installed onto a round chip. So if the hard drive fails, it'll boot directly into DOS 3.0. I'll still need a separate disk to run any extra utilities or any extra software, but for the most part, without the hard drive, it'll still function and run. And there's not a lot of computers besides one or two that I'm aware of that can do that. So let's get this thing back together, and we'll talk about a few more interesting quirks with the keyboard and the mouse. And here we have the Tandy enhanced keyboard with the original cover, which I'm really glad it came with this because of a really interesting problem this keyboard has. It does have the Tandy embossing, and even the sticker still has the original plastic cover. So this thing's actually in great shape. I think this is a mechanical keyboard. It's a bit quiet for mechanical. It might actually be soft cap. I don't know. I haven't torn it apart, but it works, so I don't have to worry about it. And it looks like the run-of-the-mill generic 101 key keyboard. You know, function keys up top, print screens, scroll lock, pause, caps lock, shift, control, alt, no Windows keys. Clearly, because this computer's not going to have Windows on it. All the main keys right here, home, page up, down, arrow keys and a T, and the numpad. So this is actually a very standard looking keyboard, and at first glance, it appears that I could use this anywhere because it does have a PS2 connector on it. Here's the quirk with this keyboard. This is actually an XT keyboard that they put a PS2 connector on the end. Yeah, this is just an XT/AT signaling keyboard with a PS2 connector on the end. So what that means is unless you have a keyboard with a PS2 connector that can auto switch between XT protocol/AT protocol and PS2 protocol, no other keyboard will work with this machine. Which absolutely just, it's why would they do that? It really makes no sense. I could understand if they would have left it the 5-pin DIN and had just a standard XT an AT keyboard, but they decided to use PS2. I mean, I know, yeah, it's smaller, so it's space saving. But the problem is that means that this keyboard really wouldn't, it might work on something else, but nothing else would work for this. Now there are actually, I had to check up on a forum page because just in case this thing didn't work, and it does work. I checked that all the keys work. There's 2 known computer keyboards that will work with this machine should this one fail. A silver badged IBM Model M, because those are a PS2 keyboard that are backwards compatible with XT and AT machines, or a keyboard that has mechanical switches to change its signaling from PS2 to XT or whatever. And a Northgate OmniKey mechanical keyboard seems to be a really common one that I've seen on forum pages. And I do have one, but it's got a couple of keycaps that are broken off. And it needs the escape key resoldered on. I'll need to fix that later. But for right now, the keyboard works, and that's all that I care about. But yeah, it's just so weird that this keyboard, there's so much proprietary stuff going on with this computer. It's just not even funny. In fact, let's even talk about the mouse. It came with the Tandy branded mouse, which is good. The reason why there's a button sound difference was when I got this, the seller said he could not get the button 1 to work. And when I opened it up, the internal button switch was just gone. Like, it was just powdered and broken. I got lucky that I found this mouse is made by Logitech, and I found it's a Logitech branded mouse, but it said, I think it was a compact mouse that somebody had cut the cable off of. So I desoldered that button, and I found that somebody had tried to repair this one previously and had a bunch of jumper wires going through the PCB, because apparently the solder pads were just gone. So I was able to resolder it on as best I could, and it does work. So that's a good thing. But the thing is that, and here's the weirdness, it's PS2, but the PS2 mouse and the PS2 port will only work under Tandy's DeskMate. If I install Windows 3.1, the PS2 port stops working and this mouse won't work. If I install Windows 3.1, I have to install a serial mouse, because it takes a very special dedicated driver to connect with the PS2 port, which is just, again, weird. Tandy went to some lengths to make this basically an XT compatible home computer that's, should be able to use standard stuff. But they put too much proprietary nonsense in it that made it such a pain in the butt. This isn't a bad computer. This is actually a really good computer. It's got the quirks with it just make it so difficult, to upgrade or to do anything with. But let's get this computer set up back to where it was and show off Tandy DeskMate. Okay, we got it all set up, and luckily, maybe not luckily, because it does use a standard VGA connector just with some pins missing. It even has the Tandy monitor, which is great. So let's power this thing up, and the hard drive is a little noisy, but without that hard drive, you wouldn't know this thing's running, because there's no power, there's no cooling fans. And we are up and running into Tandy DeskMate. So this still has some previous information on it, so I'm not going to go through everything, but it does have a file directory. Why is my mouse not working? Mouse is so slow. But you can change directories, you can format or copy disks. So this is actually a really interesting graphical user interface, because it's not all that different from, like, it's not too different from Windows 1. But it does have some differences to it. And as you can see, it is a little slow, but it's not too terrible, actually. It says it's 1:35 a.m. That's a little off. But yeah, it's got home organizer. This is actually a really, really interesting graphical user interface. It's not terrible. It is a little on the slow side. But considering that at the time, in 1990, there was a lot of graphical interfaces coming out. Commodore had one with Geos. Apple had theirs. In 1990, Windows, I think, 1 was out. You had Tandy DeskMate. IBM had their version of OS 2. I think it was OS 2.2, I believe. So I would show off a couple games, but unfortunately, I don't have too many games on floppy disk. The problem is that I had a box full of floppy games, and when I was moving some computers around in storage, I misplaced it somewhere. I'll have to look for it. But the only game I do have on a floppy disk is Oregon Trail, which I don't know if the version on this floppy is compatible with this older machine, but we shall see. How do I get to it? Let's try run. Okay, so run's not working. But exit. Yeah, let's go to DOS. So this runs Tandy DeskMate 3.04.02 and MS-DOS 5.0. Oh no, floppy drive's not working. Current drive no longer valid. Well, that's not good. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna have to I just have to do some work to this machine. It looks like the floppy drive is not reading, but that's fine. I mean, the computer's from 1990. I wasn't expecting it to work actually all that well. But yeah, this is my that's a lot of stuff in this computer. Wow. So anyway, this is my submission for Septandy, which is the Tandy 1000 RLX. This is a computer that has so many quirks to it that it actually makes it a little bit of a challenge to restore and a little bit of a challenge to use. Zoom in. But it's not that bad of a machine, actually. It definitely was on the downhill. This is toward the downhill slump of Tandy, because a lot of magazines were bashing Tandy hard after this point because of the whole. They weren't innovating anymore. They were just following trends by integrating VGA, and they really weren't doing anything special anymore. But the thing was, in the 80s, yeah, that was fine to push out as much, innovation as you can, because that's how, IDE became standardized, and computers coming with hard drives and computers coming with graphical user interfaces started coming up. That's how keyboards got their standardization. But by 1990, you had computers that were coming with hard drives. You had computers that were coming with, kilobyte of RAM weren't enough anymore. We were now in megabytes. No longer was there single digit speed CPUs. Now we're at, this is a 10 megahertz. By this point, we were in double digits. In just a few years, we were going to be hitting much more powerful machines. You had standardization for sound and video. There was no more like Hercules specific or Tandy specific or IBM specific video outputs or video modes. VGA was now out. It was dominating. It was better. You had more color, better resolution. So for Tandy to try, or any computer company to try and release something proprietary again, whether it be a sound chip or a video chip or anything that was specific only to them, would have just it would have killed them, really. So it was kind of a smart move why Tandy, dumped the Tandy graphics, but at the same time it did break compatibility with older stuff, and that's true. But at the end of the day, Tandy is missed. It really is, and it's sad that that Radio Shack is basically dead and dying too, because it's a legacy. Tandy and TRS was one of the Trinity, one of the first affordable practical home computers, and they didn't make it much past the mid 90s. Tandy, the Tandy brand for computers was dropped out, and AST bought them out and took over all their warranty stuff. And by 2020, there's not that many Radio Shack stores anymore. Tandy's no longer known for computers because they don't make computers anymore. So it's a thing. But anyway, this is my submission for Septandy, the 1000 RLX HD model or revision A. A quirky little 286 XT class machine that is, in all fairness, just a generic 286 VGA output home computer that sold for roughly $800 to $1,400 depending on configurations. So with that, I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to be tearing this apart. I'm going to be re-lubing stuff and cleaning things up and see if I can get this drive to start working again. If not, I might actually have to break down and just get the XT to CF adapter so I can get games and software on and off this. But yeah, so hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. I will answer most comments within a reasonable amount of time. If there's anything you want to see or want to see me cover, just mention it, and if I can, then I will do a video on it. But until then, this little quirky machine is reviewed, talked about, and Septandy is nearing its end. Especially by the time I get this thing edited and uploaded. It'll probably be over by then. But oh well. Anyway, see you in the next video.